Every person's story has something to teach us. How others view life, how obstacles are overcome, how joy is felt, how fears are faced, how love is expressed. The Matters of Faith podcast explores individual stories of people's lives and how faith plays a part. It may not be your story, but it may help shape yours. And now, Matters of Faith with your host, Jay Wilburn.
This is the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network with your host, Jay Wilburn. This is episode 187. In a few moments, my guest will be Armand Rosamilia. I want to talk about some of his books. He has too many to talk about in introduction, but I'm going to try anyway. Dirty Deeds is a crime fiction series that's up to book 8, and I'm almost to book 8, and it's very, very good. It's one of my favorites. Dying Days is a zombie series that's up to book 9 and is complete, so you can read it from beginning to end. Green River Blend is another book of his I really enjoy. It's a horror story about coffee. Chelsea Avenue is a great novel, and it's probably the reason he and I started collaborating was after I read that particular novel. He's also doing some interesting monster stories for one particular publisher that we'll probably talk about, and the latest in that one, if I'm not mistaken, is The Beast. We've done a few books together, including The Enemy Held Near, which is a haunted house story. Yard Full of Bones mixes cosmic horror and a little bit of mystery detective crime fiction. And then The Hidden Truth is sort of a transgressive crime fiction type novel. We have another one coming out in 2021 with Madness Heart Press called Room 138, which is a time travel science fiction story. Before we start talking to Armand, I want to talk about today's sponsors. We are sponsored by Wingspan Marketing. That's wingspanmarketing.com. They do my hosting. They do my web design. They also support my e-commerce platform, and my online store has become a major part of my income. Anytime I have a crazy idea that I can't find an app for, Wingspan Marketing is there for me, and we'll figure out how to make it work even if it really shouldn't. So they'll definitely help you out the way they've helped me, whether you're a small business, whether you're a church, an individual creator. You can't get better help at any price. Another sponsor we have is Carrion House. That's carrionhouse.com, carrionhouse.com. That's Luke Spooner's art. When I asked him what he wanted me to share when we talked about this, he just told me to talk about the work he had done for me. So that's a lot. He's done the Dead Song Legend book covers for me, including the interiors. He's done Lake Scatterwood Tales and the interiors, which is a young reader series, so those are on completely different ends of the spectrum. He did my young adult series, the covers for Maidens of Zombie Kingdom. I have a middle grade series called Time Travel Academy that he did the covers for. He did the covers for my vampire novels and more. He just has a great range, and if you're looking for book covers or basically any kind of art, if you go to that website, his contact information is up near the top, and he's going to give you artwork that's not just cookie cutter, it's not just photoshopped. It's going to look like real quality and help your book stand out. So Luke Spooner is worth the price, and you can check him out to see what he can do for you. And now we'll get into the rest of the episode. This is the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network. My guest today is Armand Rosamilia. Welcome to the program, Armand.
First time, long time, Jay.
Thanks for coming on, man. You made a joke that when I asked you to come on, I must have run out of guests because it has been a while. It's interesting. We've had conversations about life and philosophy and things, and we've talked about faith, especially with having a faith podcast on your network. But a lot of times you keep those ideas a little close to vest, and at the same time in your work you've addressed faith in some pretty bold and unique ways going around. So it's kind of interesting to have this conversation with you because I don't really know the answers necessarily. So typically the first question I ask anybody is, where did your connection to faith first begin?
I grew up Roman Catholic. On my dad's side, I'm Italian, Jersey Italian. The funny part was his side of the family is not religious at all, never were. My dad doesn't go to church, never did. My mother grew up she was born in Anderson, South Carolina, and moved to New Jersey as a kid. So she grew up Baptist. But once me and my brother were born, my mother decided to basically convert to Roman Catholic and raise us, and that was kind of one of the things my dad's mother insisted on, even though she wasn't religious. It was more of a I guess it was more of a power thing, you know. Well, if you're gonna bring religion into in my grandkids' lives, then it needs to be Roman Catholic. And we had a church right up the road from us where we grew up, St. Mary's, and so I did the CCD catechism. I went through all of that as a child, and I was that annoying kid that asked a lot of questions, and not because I wanted to be a jerk or be funny, but I genuinely had a lot of questions. I mean, it's still me. I always question everything. I always want all the answers to everything. And that was the beginning of it for me, of maybe getting all those answers. And as a child, even into my teens, I read a lot, but the Bible was something I didn't understand as there's two ways to look at it. So you have people that look at it like every word in the Bible is what actually happened. And then the other part of it is, well, everything in the Bible is, metaphor, and everything, people weren't there when it was written, and it's just lessons and that kind of thing. And I wasn't meeting in the middle anywhere. There was nobody that was telling me one way or the other. And I've always been very quiet about, as you know, religion, politics, any of those things, especially once I started writing and I started getting my stuff out there and saw other authors and the problems that they faced. No matter which side, you're a Democrat or a Republican, for instance, you're annoying the other side, and you're maybe annoying potential readers or people who don't agree with you and your personal beliefs. And right or wrong, fair or unfair, they don't really read your stuff anymore.
Now that had to be kind of a weird experience for your mother, because she's having to convert to a different denomination and then sort of leading out as the spiritual leader of the family. How did that play out for her? Like trying to, I guess, spearhead your spiritual development when she herself had sort of moved into new territory.
I think for her, so we grew up in the 70s. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. My dad worked a lot of hours, and church was, something for her to get friends with. She met a lot of people, and she became very big, not crazy over the top with church, but it was something that was always around. We were always going. We weren't going every night. We weren't going to Wednesday night masses and all this, but we were going every Sunday. And like I said, I was going to catechism, and we were doing all that, and baptisms and everything else, my communion. And we did all of that. But for her, I think it was more of the social interaction, because she was home all day. When we were in school, she was a housewife. She you can only mop the floor so many times, or watch daytime television or whatever. So I think for her, it was a great outlet to get out there. And I think that was important. The great thing for us growing up is my mother never told us not to read something, not to listen to something. She wasn't necessarily maybe happy when I brought the first Slayer album home, but she wanted it. She wanted to look at it. She didn't want to. She wanted to see the lyrics. She wanted to talk to me about it and for me to understand what this was about. A big one for me was Metallica when Creeping Death song came out. And I said, "Hey, Mom, is this, what is this about?" And I mean, I was like 15 and 16, and I kind of had an idea, and it's about Moses, and it's about him leading the people out of Egypt and all that, to a heavy metal song, basically. And it was one of those cool things where we had things like that where we would talk about. But a lot of my friends, their parents wouldn't let them read Stephen King books or Dean Koontz books. You weren't allowed to listen to heavy metal because the devil was going to possess you. You weren't allowed to play Dungeons and Dragons. So it was it was a cool thing because I was never told no, but I always knew there was a line. I always knew there, with her, there was that line of what I could or could not do.
We have a couple questions and a little side discussion going in the chat, but we'll get to that in a moment. So as kind of the kid that's questioning things and has a little bit of leeway to explore on his own, where did you end up then as you went from that kid that was taken pretty regularly to church and then moving into your own life, making your own choices, coming with your own philosophy? How did that evolve for you over time?
I'm gonna be honest. I've flip flopped a lot over the years for a few different reasons. So the first time I was going to get married. I've been married 3 times. The first time I was very young. I was in my early 20s, and we went to the church because she wanted a church wedding, but she had already been married and divorced. And the priest that we talked to basically said, "Well, you can't be married. You can't be married in a Catholic church because you've been divorced." And he was honestly, he was kind of a jerk to her, like really condescending and looking down. And it really turned me off, to wanting to come back and all that. And so we never went back to church. And then I dropped off for years. And not that I never believed in God, I just didn't believe in, I guess, organized religion at that point. And I was already out of the house. And then I got married the second time, and she was really trying to find herself. When we first started dating, she was going to church, but then she got into Buddhism and all these other, every week she would come home and she had a different religion she wanted to be a part of. So it was very hard to keep up with her. So I kind of gave up. And then, completely honest, in my 30s, and I know this is going to annoy some people, but I don't care. I did the typical horror author, I don't believe in God, I'm an atheist, or I'm agnostic kind of thing, because it was more of a fit-in thing. It was more of this is what we all do, and it's the cool thing at this point to say you don't believe. We're getting into the 2000s now, and it was kind of that God is dead mentality, which was ridiculous, and I never stopped believing, but I really pushed it away. And then in about 8 years ago, I met my current wife, hopefully my last. And she grew up. It was like completely different. I grew up in New Jersey, Northeast. A Yankee. Her father, they all grew up down here in Jacksonville, Florida, or Georgia, and he's a retired minister. So she grew up in the church. I mean, there's no wavering at all for her. She believes, and she believes that what the Bible says is the truth. And so when we first started dating, politically we were on a different side, and with religion, not that we were on a different side, but I just didn't have that faith like she had. And the only time I was really ever around it was my mother. And it was more of, we go to dinner there and we'd say grace before we ate. That was pretty much it. So when we started dating, it was really different. And then going to see her father, kind of guest priest, guest minister at a few different churches here in Jacksonville, and there's about 1 million of them. And that was really I mean, like, more times I would leave crying because of the things that he said. And so I think I have a really good base. I don't actively go to church. Most of the time she does not, but every now and then we will go. We're still kind of looking for the right fit for us. And I mean, we talk about it a lot. We still have a lot of philosophical issues with it, from where I come from or where she comes from, but we always usually meet in the middle there.
Now, talking about like his sermons moving you, you tend to be, I'm not trying to break down a brand or persona or anything, but you tend to be a person who does get moved emotionally by things, whether it's music or books or, in this case, the spiritual. What with all you've been through, what's kind of allowed you to continue to be the kind of guy that can cry at a TV show, or the kind of guy who can be moved by a piece of art or something like that?
I think I've always had that. As a kid, I was very emotional. So I probably have never told this part of my life. When I went to kindergarten, first day orientation kindergarten, I was fine, and then another kid started crying, and then I got upset and I started crying. And kindergarten, first grade, and even into second grade, probably once a week, I had a breakdown, and I would cry like a baby. And I wanted to go home. I wanted my mother, because my mom was home with us all the time. And I was very, very emotional as a child. And then as I got older, elementary school and into grade school, I was actually tall, and I was actually very skinny. I had big, giant, Coke bottle glasses. I had that bowl cut my mother gave me. I wore we had no money, so I wore really cheap clothes and the same pair of sneakers all year. And I got bullied. I got picked on a lot in like fifth grade, all the way into right into high school. And my junior high years were awful, because I got my butt kicked. And even though I was a big kid, I had no idea what to do with it. And I was I was a target for a lot of kids in gym class and different things. And plus, it didn't help then, being a Dungeons and Dragons kid, and wearing crappy clothes and all that. And when I got into high school, of course, then I did my best to blend in. I got into the heavy metal and all that. And most kids do that because all my friends who were into it were from broken homes, or they had issues at home or whatever. I didn't. I had a great time growing up. My parents are amazing and very supportive, but I guess it was rebelling against all of that. And I was also very emotional, always. So I took everything to heart, and I still do, as you know, and you goof on me. For instance, on Facebook, when I would post pictures of whatever I ate, and somebody would make a comment on it, and like, oh, you should have used this or that. I would lose my mind over that. And my wife would laugh, and she would go, "Oh my God, so they don't like that type of bread you use?" And I would block people. I would lose my mind over that stuff, because I'm still emotional. I'm still that little kid. People look at me. You can look at me, and people go, "Oh, he's a biker, or used to be a pro wrestler, whatever." I'm a big, bald dude with a giant goatee. So a lot of people, when they think I'm so intimidating, and I don't smile. So it's really funny once you get to know me, and I'm so different than, I guess, that persona.
Now, as you've been a writer for a while, and then professionally for also a while. In the early days of your writing, your sort of some of the things that you were going through and the pain you were dealing with sort of fueled your writing at the same time that it kind of got in the way. And you've talked about this a little bit on your own podcast, but what was that like, having that thing that was sort of your creative outlet, but at the same time, the parts of your life that gave you story material were also kind of getting in the way?
My first two wives, and then the girl that I lived with before I met my wife now, I was with her for about 6 years. So you're talking a big chunk of my 20s and 30s. I was with women that didn't want me to write. They wanted me to suck it up and be a retail manager and work 80 hours a week, and that was going to be my life. They were going to be my life. And because I didn't have a ton of extra time, because I was working 6 and 7 days a week, the time when I was home when I was writing, for them it was kind of like my second wife made a comment that I was cheating on her with my writing, like that was my mistress.
Right.
And so while other guys might sneak out in the middle, get up in the middle of the night and look at, I don't know, get up, put a gun on the computer and look at like pornography, I was literally writing stories, but sneaking them in, because I've always wanted to write, and I wasted probably a good 10 years of my life not writing, or writing like, bringing a pad with me to work, and during lunchtime just kind of jotting notes and stuff for stories that I was never going to have time to write. But then going forward, that fueled a lot of especially my horror stuff. And so my joke is always, where did your inspiration come from? And I say I have 2 ex-wives that I've killed millions of times in stories, and that's where I go. And it's a joke, but it's kind of true, because I can still tap into some of that stuff. I can still feel a lot of that stuff, but it's not as deep. It's not as bad as it used to be.
Now, I follow you on Patreon. I'm a supporter there, and so I get a lot of good short stories and pieces, and you'll even share some stories from the past. You'll let people see kind of how you used to write and that sort of thing. And of course, I have a lot of your books on my shelf and in my Kindle, and have been reading along. I get the sense that you're a much better writer now. You've been very good for a long time, but there's a different depth and a different. It feels like you're tapping more resources. Some of that may come from experience, and I do kind of want to walk through your career a little bit, but sort of looking at those years when you were sneaking stories and maybe couldn't tell the difference between a good and bad story, and sort of where you are now, where you have a good life, and you're in a supportive relationship, and things are fairly stable, especially compared to other points in your life. And as a reader, even though you may not be drawing from immediate darkness all the time, I see a range in your writing that seems broader. So from your perspective, from that point to now, do you see and feel a difference in the sort of work that you're putting out?
I think, and by the way, thank you for all that.
Oh, you're welcome.
That means a lot coming from you. I think part of it is not telling the same story again. Part of it is really knowing my voice now as a writer, and really understanding kind of the breakdown of characters, and inserting them into a plot, because I think without characters you don't have anything.
Right.
And even if you have a great plot, if those characters are flat, then no one's gonna be invested. So it always starts with those characters. And I think for me, it's not my I've come to the understanding that I'm a pulp fiction writer. I just want to tell a good story. I just want you to pick up a 50,000 word book and read it in 2 days. I'm not going for big words. I'm going for great quirky characters, dialogue, action, and hopefully there's a twist or two in there that makes you keep coming back. And so that to me is really important, and it's something that it's taken me a long time to realize that I'm never going to write like Dean Koontz. I'm never going to write like Robert E. Howard or Elmore Leonard or any of these, big writers. Like I'll read a book. For instance, I read the Stephen Graham Jones, The Only Good Indians, and
right.
I am never going to write like that.
Right.
But it's brilliant. It's just a phenomenal book. And for me at this point, which is what I would have done 20 years ago, I have to write my version of this. I have to keep up with the Joneses here. Pun intended there.
Yeah.
I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to write like him. I'm never going to write with a lot of these authors. But I can appreciate them. And there's I think as a younger author, you're intimidated by somebody like that. If I had read that book in my early 20s, I probably would have said I don't want to write anymore because I'm never going to be this good. And now I just go, you know what? That's a great book, and I will suggest it to everyone. But On the other hand, I'm not competing with that. I'm competing with myself to get better.
Yeah. Now, speaking for myself, I do still kind of get that feeling when I read a book that's like better than any I'm ever going to write, kind of thing. And I'm reading pretty broadly, so I tend to run into that a lot. And so I'll still get that moment where I'm like, oh, like the fact that I know this book exists kind of hurts my feelings a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, you and I have talked about this a good bit, and especially since we're both full time writers. There's always been a part of you that's tried to sort of hold on to that desperation, like early in your career when you were sort of writing for your life, basically, where it was, you're trying to make income and trying to pay bills and all that kind of stuff. Just from that, there's always been a part of you that even when things started to get more stable, when you were full time and that kind of thing, you seem to try to cling to that sort of desperate feeling as a way to drive you. Talk about that a little bit in terms of, what that was like as you went forward, and if that's still a part of sort of your writing persona now.
I hope it is part of it. I hope it's not manufactured or in my head at this point, because it does help. I mean, obviously, I always say the best thing for me is like I just did a guest blog for somebody about writer's block, and I said I don't have writer's block because the alternative is going back to retail management. It's that fear of I have to get a 9 to 5, and at this point in my life, I don't think I can do it. I mean, I don't think mentally there's any, physically probably even, there's no way I can do those hours and work like that. So that's part of it. But then I also look at, it's kind of like my life is kind of like the Rocky movies, and I feel like I'm in Rocky, what, 3 or 4, where he's rich and he's not even really training, and he's just like kind of going through the motions. And that's at points, that's what it's like. It's like I will go through points where I will finish a couple things and I'll be like, this is good enough. And then I need kind of that kick to go, you know what? I need to write more. I need to keep up my daily average. I need to keep doing my sprints. That's the most important. And my wife will yell at me every now and then and say, stop with the social media, stop with the promoting, all the other stuff, because you won't have anything to promote if you're not finished with this book.
Right.
So she's pushing me to words are the most important thing. And my fiscal year just ended. So it's I ended up with 455,000 words I wrote in the last 12 months. And my goal was 400,000. So I did an extra book
right.
this year than what I wanted, which is great. And I think it's that push. It's I need to find that drive. I need to find that, because I'm in a let's be honest, and I'm in a great position. My wife has a phenomenal career. She makes a lot of money. My money at this point is kind of like play money. We buy a ton of Funko Pops. We used to go to a ton of baseball games. We travel a lot, and it's at some point I could probably stop, and it wouldn't financially affect us at all. And that's a scary thing sometimes, because mentally I don't want to stop. I mean, right. This keeps me going. If I do 2 days in a row, the depression kicks in. I suffer from bipolar, so all those things kind of add to it. Again, I'm a very emotional person, so when I'm writing and when I'm getting a contract or when I'm doing an interview, whatever, I'm excited. I'm high as a kite, and then the reality kicks in when I get a couple of rejections in a row, or a story's just not working for me. Just bad things happen. Then I cycle down really, really bad, and I get, like we all get, I get imposter syndrome. Some days I'm like, this story is awful. Everything I've written is awful, and that's why I'm not getting reviews, and that's why my sales are garbage, and on and on and on. And then all it takes is that one, that one thing where somebody says, "Hey, I read your book and it's great," or "Hey, when's the next one coming out?" I mean, it's real simple, and you can really play with my emotions, my ups and downs. Especially like by making fun of what I'm eating for lunch.
Now, you spend a lot of time connected with the podcast, but then on your own as well, where you were reaching out to other authors, mentoring, talking other people through some of their struggles, sometimes personal, sometimes professional. What is it about what you've been through, or the way that you want to live, that causes you to so deliberately play that role for so many different authors?
I think I'm a big believer in karma. I'm a big believer in what you put out there, you're going to get back. And I was very lucky. So this will be my 8th or 9th year of full time being able to write and make a living. But I mean, my first short story was released when I was in high school in 1988. So there's a lot of time in between. And in the beginning, I was on my own. There was no other authors in my area. There was no internet. There was none of that. And when I started to get serious, and I saw like J.A. Conrath and Scott Nicholson are the two guys that always come up for me, because they answered all my questions. And most of my questions were ridiculously stupid. And they really had a lot of patience with, here's this new kid who was probably the same age as them. But they had done a lot of success with some major publishers at that point in their career. So I was able to do that, and I remember basically being told more or less by both of them because I would say, what can I do? What can I do to help or whatever? And their thing was, pay it forward. Someday, hopefully you'll be in a position to help other authors. So that was kind of, for me, that was part of that. So about a month ago, I had Alexander C. Bailey, is his official writing name, Alex from Iowa, was having kind of a rough personal patch, and my wife said, we'll buy you a plane ticket, and why don't you just come here for a couple weeks? And I said, I'm going to put you through the Rosamilia boot camp, the writing boot camp. And it was great for me because it kept me in the chair every day. And it was a leading by example, but it was also, here's this kid who's literally half my age, and he has so many questions, and he's just starting out, and I was able to give him all of the good and bad that I've done in my career. And he did great. I mean, he was killing it with stories, and he still is weeks later. We just had a conversation this morning about a couple of upcoming anthologies. And for me, that's awesome. I mean, a couple other authors I'll talk to every other Saturday morning or Sunday morning and share some of my stories. It's talking shop, which I love. And so it's all that, and it's just really just helping. And I share a ton of books on Twitter like you do. And so for me, it's just really, it's a positive. There's so much negative, especially online. And so I just focus on helping other authors, and other authors have in turn helped me as well. So that's the fun of it.
I really enjoyed sort of watching that virtually, where Alex was talking about it online, and then you guys had him on the podcast too. So kind of being able to follow him through, I think, helped a lot of people too. And then it was just kind of fun to watch, an author kind of finding his way and that kind of thing. Speaking of kind of finding your way, for a long time you were back in the era of stapled together zines and pre Amazon and all that kind of thing, and you were pretty early into ebooks, and you're pretty early into a lot of things because you've been doing this a while. So kind of looking at your career, when we get to Dying Days, I know there was an iteration of that was earlier before it became the series itself, but was Dying Days your first real push into a series of books?
Yeah, I think up to that point, I hadn't really written too much but short stories. I had probably 100 short stories that were written. And I was really afraid to move up. Death Metal, the original version of Death Metal, was about 28,000 words, so it was like a novella. That came out January 2006. But before that, I really hadn't written anything longer. And then there was a company that had a call for an extreme zombie novella, and I wrote Highway to Hell, and it was crazy. Like from the opening line, it's just really something. It was way out of my wheelhouse with violence and everything else, but I really liked the story, and it didn't end up winning. They only took 4 novellas for it, but the editor said, "I really love this story. You really should do something with this." So I released it, and at the same time, I had been writing short stories with Darlene Bobich in that same world. How would this normal girl who worked at a makeup counter? She's not, I mean, she's not gorgeous, she's not ugly, she's just kind of normal, little chubby. How would she survive in the zombie apocalypse? And that was the start of what was then became Darlene Bobich, Zombie Hunter, the first Zombie Killer, the first book, and then it went into Dying Days. At that point, I was like, you know what? I want to write this as a series. I want to see what I can do in this world because I knew there was so much more to it. And I was driving home. I was driving home on A1A in Florida, and there was the gorgeous beach to my left. And of course, in my mind, I'm like, what would happen if zombies just came out of the water? What if they just came out? I mean, you always see zombie books are always dark. It's in the city. What if it was like in beaches in Florida on a gorgeous day and people started getting attacked? So that was kind of where Dying Days started.
Now, roughly, can you remember when that first novella was written, and then when you finished book 9? Do you have those dates in your head at all?
I want to say 2009, maybe the first one came out, or I wrote it. Probably 2008, 2009. I wrote that. It took a long time, and it's really only like 30,000 words or 35,000 words. It took me a long time to write that one. And I think it's been 3 years now since the last one came out. At one point, I was doing the Winter Zombie and then the Summer Zombie tours, which I started and you took over for a number of years. So every June was a book, and then every November was a book. And so I was putting out in that world, I was putting out 2 books a year, just doing that. But there's a lot of other side. There's, I think, a half a dozen other books that are also set in that world. So I was writing a lot in that world, and I got to about book 6, and I knew, you know what, I don't want to do this forever. I don't want to do 30 books. And I was kind of, and you and I had talked about this back then. I didn't want to be known as a zombie author. I wanted to be known as a horror author or an author. I wanted to do other stuff at that point.
Now, book 6, I don't want to do any spoilers or anything because I've read them and we could go into a lot of depth about them. But
there's zombies and spoilers.
Yeah. There's zombies and bad stuff happens. Right around I guess it's right around book 6. Now that you mention it, maybe into book 7, where you really did start kind of experimenting and going different directions with it, and even in some cases exploring big topics like characters going through big evolutions and even coming to realizations about God and other things like that. Was it partly that, or were you just at a point where you were going to take it in a different direction, whether you were planning to end it or not?
I think by about that point, I knew I wanted to end it. I knew I didn't want to do a ton of books, and at around book 5, right after book 5 is when I started 6. And I think I was hitting a groove with a lot of the characters, and I wanted more than this same old, or I knew that would probably be the last book. So yeah, I do explore some of the characters, their beliefs in whether it's belief in God or anything else. I really wanted more to the series because it gets really easy in zombies to just, let's have some action. Let's throw in some zombies. Let's have some action. Let's throw in some zombies. And I wanted parts of those books where it wasn't just about the zombies. It was really about the characters. It was really about interaction between certain groups and whatnot. So at that point, I think I was probably about halfway done with 6, and I said, you know what? even though I'm a total pantser, I knew this was a 9 book. I knew where Darlene needed to go, and it gets it. Some writers, readers, whatever they are, some readers have said it gets really there's a lot of fun. You really hit your stride with the action and the dialogue and the interactions with the characters, but you also tap into some really deep subjects like God, like life in the universe and everything that you uh, really didn't hint at too much in the beginning of the series. And I think for me that was just me as a writer evolving, and basically doing a better job of it.
Now, I was going to ask you about switching genres, and as I was thinking about it, you've always kind of played with that all along. So there's some pen name stuff that you did in different genres. You did some beach reads for a while. I guess the big change was when you started really pushing into crime fiction. So I suppose, being a person who's followed your career, you've always sort of pushed out into other genres, sort of experimenting and testing the waters and stuff. But then when you get to looking at the Dirty Deeds books and going forward from there in a real push towards crime fiction, that felt like sort of something different, because you were attaching your own name to it, and you were sort of almost shifting your brand around it going forward. Was there something particular about that moment when you decided, okay, I'm not just testing the waters here with crime fiction, I'm really going to explore what it's like to be a crime fiction writer, in addition to some other things that I've done? And I guess, what was that sort of leap like for you as an author and as a person?
Yeah, I mean, I had done like the Flagler Beach fiction series, which was character stories, beach reads, but it was never, I never, I never really pushed it. It was never serious, other than I would sell a lot of them at book signings locally, and I was fine with that. I love the series, I love the characters, and there's a few characters in that series. Actually, I was talking to somebody recently about that, and I said, some of those characters ended up being major characters in the Dirty Deeds series. I kind of moved them across, and at the time I thought these were going to be one-off characters. I had started writing a horror book. I had started writing. It was going to be called "Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good," and it was about this hitman who kills children, and having to basically wake up every morning and knowing that this is his life, and it was going to deal with a lot of heavy issues and different things, and I didn't want to write it. As I got maybe a chapter or two into it, I was like, what, I don't want to write this. It's really dark. It's really too heavy for me, and I have kids. Even though my kids are older, I have kids, and I don't want to deal with this. And so I literally deleted it, which is probably the only time I've ever done that. I just completely deleted the whole thing, and I was never going to touch that. And out of nowhere, in 2015, maybe, I saw a call for Amazon Kindle Scout. They were doing a contest, and they would basically take a bunch of, give them your 50,000 word book, and they would basically, they would do like a voting thing, and people would be able to read it, and they were only going to take 1 or 2 books a month out of like the 50 or 60 that were up, and they would offer you a contract. They'd offer you a $1,500 advance and an Amazon contract, Kindle Press contract, but it said no horror, and I said, well, maybe I'll write something else. Maybe there's something different. And I thought of that story, and I said, but I don't want to write that story. And I said, wait a minute. Like, it hit me. What if I flip it, and he's hired to kill children, but instead of actually killing the children, he saves them. He puts them into a better life. And he takes these bad people their money, and he does that. And I wanted to have a lot of humor, and I purposely wanted no profanity, no sex, no over-the-top violence. I wanted it to be commercial, because at that point I was reading a ton of really big crime thriller authors. And I wanted to tap that market, because with horror, I thought I had hit my ceiling. So I thought, This might be a total change for me. This might be I might totally fail at this, but let me give it a shot. And even like the cover, the original cover we did, because you needed to give them a cover. My wife actually put the cover together of the original, and it's kind of similar. It's got the baseball cards. It's got, but the original one was like a handgun and 2 bullets and some blood. And when I sent it in, it was I won a contract, and it was right after my birthday in 2015, and the book was released at the end of January. So we did like a bunch of edits, and they said you have to change the cover. Our algorithms for Amazon won't accept blood or bullets or a handgun.
Right.
So do something different. So I completely revamped the cover, not completely, but I changed a couple things on the cover, let's say. And I needed something more professional, so I actually hired Jack Wallen, who's done a bunch of covers for me, and he did a phenomenal job based on what we gave him, much better than we could have done. And they loved it, and I made my advance back pretty darn quick, and tons of reviews, and I got the Amazon machine behind me. And I think that really helped. I think if I had just written it and put it out myself, I don't know if I would be writing book 9 right now. But it just really kind of had a mind of its own. And, each subsequent book, you want to still capture that audience. And from the last time I checked, between book 1 and book 8, I think it's a 72% sell-through rate, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, that's unheard of.
So it means if you're reading book 1, you're reading all the way through. The problem is I need to find more readers to start book 1. Right. That's always the challenge.
Now, pushing forward with crime fiction, it is we've been to conventions for different genres, and they're almost each their own world. Crime fiction has some challenges for the author in terms of what's expected and what's considered successful and a number of things like that. As you've looked at, as you've looked at pushing more into crime fiction and possibly looking at agents, looking at publishers, looking at other types of books, how daunting it has been that process for you as an independent author, and I guess sort of what are you kind of planning for the future that you can tell us about?
It's overwhelming. I mean, to put it in a word, there's a really, really good noir crime thriller author, Michael Wiley, who is actually he lives here in Jacksonville. So I've gotten to meet him in person. We've had lunch together. I've gone to a few of his book signings, and he's with a pretty big publisher. So I had started a noir crime thriller idea, and I kind of pitched it to him, and I went through, what would be my expectations. And it's completely different from horror. So for a horror author, you write a bunch of short stories, you try to get into some small press, and you eventually move up, and then you're getting big books. Then you're Jonathan Maybury and Paul Tremblay and those types of authors. With crime thrillers, you start at the top. I mean, you usually get an agent, and you usually hit those big publishers. And the small press are for the guys who have kind of trickled down. So it's completely opposite. And he asked me a lot of questions, and he gave me some ideas about advances, which are a lot more than we're getting in horror, if we're getting any. If I would have a problem with a pen name, because unfortunately, Dirty Deeds are 50,000 word books, which are way too short they want 80 to 100, 120,000 words. So it's almost like if going after an agent, don't even mention it, but don't push that I've done these books, because they don't count. And that was some of the advice. More or less is what he said, but he was very helpful with all of that. And an agent is definitely something I would try to do. That would be something that I just haven't had the idea. I've had a couple of false starts on writing stuff, which I thought were maybe okay, but my challenge is I probably need to outline. And that's tough for me. That's really, really hard for me. And so it's one of the things where my wife basically said, stop overthinking it, start taking notes, don't count the words in you're on your spreadsheet, just start taking notes. So I've done that, and I've created some characters, and I've created some stuff, and next year I will definitely start at least one of those stories and see where it goes.
Now, before we go, like on your shelf behind you, you have the Beast and Frozen in Ice. Now, I had said that the Beast was latest, but is Frozen in Ice the latest release?
No.
What's the latest in those?
So I have four now. I have a Gromny, which is the first one. Then the Beast came out last November, and then Frozen in Ice, and the latest one is The Sea Was Angry.
Oh, okay, so that's already out.
That's right. It's out. Yeah, it's been out for a couple weeks now, and those are all by Severed Press.
All right, I've been reading them out of order. You're putting those out pretty quick, so
Yeah. Well, they're novellas. I've just it's one of those things where every second or third thing I'm writing, I'll write one of those. So it's a six book deal. So I will give the exclusive now. The next one will be called Abandoned. The fifth book is called Abandoned. The sixth book is Abandoned. I had to think, and that one would be set on an island off the coast of Japan. And it's a horror book with monsters. And then the sixth book will be a book, I think it's Trapped in Denver or something.
Right.
And it will be a book where basically a monster is let loose in the Denver airport during a snowstorm. But it will involve one character from each of the previous five books
who
happens to be at the airport. And that wasn't planned originally when I pitched the books, but it's something I'm going to do. And I've been doing really well, especially The Sea Was Angry. The cover's phenomenal. It's like a giant, when I basically pitch give them the book, and I say, okay, when the edits come back, and they say, give me an idea for the cover. So I've given them ideas for the covers, and that one was I want a giant kraken or monster with a tiny little like shrimp boat, and that's the cover, and it's a phenomenal cover. It's probably one of my favorite covers of all time. So it's that's neat. So that's out now, and I got a ton of short stories coming out in anthologies this time of year.
We've had a lot of conversation going on in chat. Like early on, someone asked what was the patron saint of Armand's beard, and then they started talking about what were the patron saints of books. So that's been going back and forth for a while. And then people have been responding to like talking about how they feel depression too, and other people were talking about following along with Alex's post was kind of fun as well. One person has already said that Frank Edler's Goodreads updates while he was reading The Sea Was Angry were hilarious.
Oh my god,
I didn't follow that. Was he just? He's usually a tough reviewer. So was he being lenient or?
He gave me a great review. He gave me a 3.5 star review,
which is good for Frank Edler.
That's like a 5.5 for anybody else. He was doing the book is The Sea Was Angry, and of course that's when I pitched the books to them. So I'd written real quick. I'd written a Gromny for them, and it did really well. Like opening, like the first 2 weeks, it sold a ton. And so they said, "Hey, pitch us some more books." So I pitched them 8 ideas. Well, I happened to be flying from California back home with my wife and my daughter, and we were literally trapped in Denver, not for a snowstorm, but because of the rain and the high winds. So as I'm sitting in this airport, I start just coming up with ideas for books. So I gave them 8 ideas, and they ended up picking 5 of them. And I gave them all titles, but I was like, so The Beast was because there was a growing up, there's an urban legend about a park, Portsea Park, near where I grew up in Middletown, New Jersey. In the 80s, when I grew up, that there was a Bigfoot. They called it the Beast, lived there. So the book is basically set in the mid 80s at that real park. And so when I was doing these pitches, the one about so it's basically the sea life is mad at us and they start attacking us. And I had written a short story years ago that I had remembered, and I knew it would be better as a longer book. So I just called it The Sea Was Angry, figuring that the publisher would change it, because The Sea Was Angry is a speech from George Costanza from Seinfeld. So when I told Chuck Buda that, I mean, he died because he did, he does the whole speech. I can do the whole speech too. So when it came out and they were like, no, we love that title. I was like, oh my God, that's funny. So Frank started doing The Sea Was Really Mad, The Sea Was PMSing, the sea was a little bit upset. I mean, every chapter he was updating, he was doing that, which was really funny to follow along to see what he came up next.
Knowing you're going to get a 3.5 star from him, no matter how well you wrote.
Oh yeah, yeah.
All right, we've talked about your books a lot, but before we go ahead and tell people where they can find you.
So the easiest way is ArmandRosamilia.com. I'm on Twitter at Armand Author. I'm most active there. I also have a Patreon. Just look me up, Armand Rosamilia. I am on LinkedIn. I am on Instagram at Project Entnet. And then you can check out my Armcast podcast or the Mondo Method podcast or the latest one that I'm doing because, I have all this free time.
Oh, another one. All right.
I'm doing another. It's Baseball Writers, the IBWAA podcast, and I'm part of when I put out my A View from My Seat, my baseball book. I joined the IBWAA, which is the Internet Baseball Writers Association of America, and they wanted to put a podcast together, and they came to me and said, "Hey, you've been doing podcasts," and I said, "You know what? I'll do an interview, but I can't do the whole podcast." So every week I do like a 20-minute interview with somebody who's written a baseball book or does a baseball blog and different things like that because I love baseball so much. So.
Oh, wow, that's cool. Have you started that already, or?
It's we're about 2 months in. We haven't really promoted it a ton, but we're kind of kicking up the gear now because we're finally on all the places you can find podcasts.
Okay. I'll have to do some catching up on that one then. All right, before we go, I want to remind everyone about our sponsors. Again, Wingspan Marketing. You can go to them for your internet solutions. I use them for just about everything, and so I'm speaking from experience with them. Also want to thank Carrie In-House. Luke Spooner has been a phenomenal part of my writing career, and the book covers help with that as well. And again, thank you, Armand, for being on the show.
Did you notice the shirt I'm wearing, Jay?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that earlier. He's wearing one of my old school shirts that I was selling from convention tables. So,
actually, you know what? I've worn this. This is like one of my around the house shirts now. And I've worn it so much, it like just fits perfect.
Okay, good. I do grow on people given enough time.
Yes.
All right. So thanks again for being on, and I look forward to talking to everyone again next week.
Talk to you later, Jay.